Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Frank and Stan chat. And this is edition number 203. And those of you watching on video will notice that we have two guests with us today. So it's great to have Maxine O'Neill and Adam Boddison with us today. Hello, folks.
Good
Yeah,
morning.
got some nice waves and everything, smiles. Yes, thank you very much for joining us. We'll come to you in a minute just to do your sort of introductions, but just want to get to Stan because he wasn't here last week. He was off doing, I suspect, more important things. So, how are you today, Stan?
I'm okay. I'm not sure it was more important. It was just a clash of dates.
Yeah, yeah. But
It
also
was a,
involved closing
a
down a
briefing for
caravan
head
in
teachers.
North Wales.
No, it was a briefing for head teachers.
Oh, right.
I didn't go to Wales till Friday afternoon.
Right. Well, it's great to have you back. Viewing figures were up last week, Stan. Probably double what
Yes.
they were the week before, but we won't. As you know, we've got to be careful but interpreting data. But anyway, Maxine, do you want to tell colleagues who you are and the sort of work you've been doing with Adam and how you know each other?
I'm Maxine O'Neill. I'm the head teacher of Hope School, which is a special school in Liverpool. We serve children who have a diagnosis or an education healthcare plan, which has their primary needs are around social, emotional, and mental health issues. And I suppose within that, we follow quite a trauma-informed approach. So really, a lot of the children we attract are children who are possibly in the care system or post-adoption. And sort of the work we do around trauma-informed has sort of got quite a lot of traction. And we've got a project called the Heart Project, which has won a number of awards. And how I know Adam, well, Adam is actually my brother, but also my co-author for our book, The Secret Life of SENCOs, which has just recently come out. So that's how I know him in this world, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, isn't it? I think we were talking before we started recording. There's been quite a lot of discussion about SEND this week from the Secretary of State, in a sense, emphasising the need for schools to be more inclusive. I think that's a general thrust of it. I mean, how does it feel for you at the moment in the special sector in Liverpool?
I think there's such a will for people to be inclusive. And I think, as we talked about just before we came on, that word means different things to different people. And what do we really mean by inclusion? I think Adam and I do talk about it in the book about, ordinary available provision. And, that one school can be really inclusive with everything they offer, and a child might not be perceived as having been on the SEND register or needing the HCP and go to another school and seem to have profound needs, and which is most inclusive, the one that puts them on the list or the one that has it as ordinary available provision. I think particularly in Liverpool, there are lots of issues around the number of places in special schools, and the need for tribunals and the time that's taken up, really.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny.
I will say, on Friday, one of the topics that head teachers brought up was this is primary heads and nursery heads. The additional, it appears, children with complex needs that are coming into primary with complex needs that are beyond anything they've ever dealt with before. And the issue is how to deal with that and provide that child the best education you can when it's beyond what they've ever done before.
Yeah,
What,
sorry, Adam, yeah. We're actually just piloting a project in Liverpool with some of our heart schools around creating some kind of internal provision for those children, particularly
That's
when they're post, understanding necessarily, not even understanding all of their needs. But, we've got schools now that saying they've got 8 children in a class with the needs that you're describing, and they're so complex that it's not possible to deliver a curriculum within that room. And what's happening is schools are creating something which they don't know where their starting point is. So what we're trying to do is take them back and going back to curriculum offer and what is it that they need, rather than we know that they can't access it in the mainstream schools. So we've got a number of schools involved in a project around that.
that's interesting because the step forwards that a nursery and a junior school and a primary school have made was exactly that, to create a room, a provision, and the argument, which was quite good amongst the head teachers, was we're trying to be more inclusive by making sure the curriculum fits this child, rather than putting them in a class where the curriculum doesn't fit them at all and they don't access it. So if you like, in teaching these children separately for parts of the day, we're trying to be more inclusive, not less inclusive. So it was really interesting. And since then, I've had a chat with a head teacher somewhere else who said, can you come and talk to my group of head teachers about that? Because we're having exactly the same issue.
Yeah, I think we've got one grandson. He started in primary school in North Manchester in September, and he has the attention to detail by the teacher has been amazing, for because he has a few needs. So, and it was very subtle and not overplayed, but that has actually made quite a significant difference to the way in which he's settled in. I mean, I felt as you worry about children with needs going into primary school, and you think actually what's going to happen here, but it's so reassuring to just see some very, very simple adaptations that have been made that have enabled him to feel really settled and to begin to thrive. So I just really wanted to call out, because sometimes I'm the worst one. It's all doom and gloom. I just really felt as though I wanted to say, well done to that teacher, well done to that class, well done to that school, to enable him to to get off on a strong footing.
I do think, Frank, there's a genuine push from these head teachers to get it right.
Right.
But they know they can't cope with some of these sort of reception children that are non-verbal and attacking other children, and can't access any part of the curriculum yet. It's how do we support them and support the rest of the children? That's their issue.
I mean, just getting onto the book that you two wrote, is this the sort, was this the driving force behind the book? These sorts of issues? Go on, Adam, what was it?
Well, there's a few things. I think, from my perspective, one of the things I often hear in mainstream schools is they think that in special schools they have some magic formula or some secret sauce or whatever you want to call it that they just can't access, or they haven't got, whether it's resources or budget or more staff or a particular trade. I don't know what they think is happening in these special schools, which is so different to mainstream. But there's this view that we could never possibly do that in our school. These children must have special provision, and sometimes that's true, but often it's not true. And it's often, for me, about how you choose to deploy the resources that you've got in the first place, what you choose to prioritise in terms of the culture and values of your school. And so part of the driving force here was about trying to, if you like, expose some of what happens in specialist provision that actually could apply very broadly across the education system, whether that be in mainstream or special, but also then looking at what SENCOs in mainstream schools are doing, because there are some excellent SENCOs out there who often their work doesn't get seen because they are the only one in their school, and they're kind of slowly working away behind the scenes doing some incredible stuff. And it's quite a lonely place to be. And so they don't know if what they're doing is normal or different or whatever. So part of what we wanted to do is, if you like, shine a light almost on all of this good stuff that's going on, so we can, as a sector, learn the lessons of what's going on in the wider system, and better still apply those lessons so they help children going forwards as well.
Brilliant. And Adam, we get onto your introduction now. So who are you?
Well, you already know that I'm Maxine's brother, but I am the former Chief Executive of the National Association for Special Educational Needs. Some of your listeners may be aware of something called Whole School Send, so I was chair of Whole School Send as well, and been actively involved in that. But my background is actually as a secondary school maths teacher. I've also taught in primary. I'll tell you, that's a story. When I trained as a secondary teacher and did my first year in primary with no primary training in year one, and that to run the high school musical singing club, that was a steep learning curve for me, I can tell you. But that was interesting. Look, I'm really delighted to be on this session with you. And I just had a reflection as well on what we were talking about before about the complexity of needs coming into the system as well, because there's a kind of macro picture to this as well, which is that several things have happened, a kind of perfect storm, if you like, which has made this issue far worse than it probably ought to have been. So some of this is good things that have happened, by the way. But so, for example, there's been advances in healthcare. So you have children now who are living longer, those with complex medical needs and therefore accessing education, who would not have gone to school before. And those children, because of the nature of their needs, tend to require specialist provision. And actually, if you look at the amount of specialist provision we have as a country, it hasn't really changed that much. So that means you've got children who 20 years ago, 10 years ago, might have been in a special school. They're now in a mainstream school. So you've got a greater volume and complexity of need, both in specialist and mainstream provision. And all of that has happened at the same time that there's been a funding squeeze on education across the board. So you've got more need in terms of complexity and volume, and you've got your ordinarily available provision starting to drop as well because of a resource squeeze. So you can see how that's really quite challenging. And this is why there are these kind of systemic issues around high needs funding and various other things. Yes, I always hear about there are efficiencies and things we could do better and differently. Of course, that's true. But some of this is just systemic challenges that are baked into the system from the outset that no one, even with the best will in the world, can do a lot about. So that sounds very pessimistic, doesn't it? But there are things we can do. But I do think it's not only on what's happening in individual schools the solution. There does need to be some national rethinking. And one of the things I really liked, there was a letter from the Association for Education Psychologists as an open letter that was written to Bridget Phillipson. And in that letter, they were kind of saying how there's this kind of blame culture at the moment where, everyone blames the local authorities because they put barriers in the way of identifying children with SEND, particularly those who want EHC plans. Local authorities blame the schools because they're not putting the proper provision in place. Schools blame the pushy parents, inverted commas. Worst of all is obviously the children getting blamed because it's for behaviours and all these narratives around behaviour that we hear. So everyone's blaming everybody else, but that's a symptom of a broken system. And what this letter kind of says is you can't look at fixing the SEND issue by itself. The only way really to fix the issue is to think about the whole system, and that's really what successive kind of attempts to fix the system have failed to do, which is to look at the whole system.
And a big thing for me is the way that the accountability framework sits at an institutional level. It never tries to look at the system, the local environment, shall we say, the ecosystem within education, within that community, within that town, that city.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I think there have been some attempts to look at this. I mean, I think Public Accounts Committee, National Audit Office, and so on have kind of tried to look at that. And in fact, on that note, there was this National Audit Office report that came out this week, which was a follow-up from a 2019 report, which I call it a report on SEND spend. That's not their official title, but essentially it's looking at where the money is spent. And what I really like about the report that's come out just in the last week or two, although it's been talked about a lot at the moment, is it tries to kind of call out why it is that you can have successive governments saying, well, we're putting more and more money into the system every year, and every school in the country saying we're getting less and less money every year. So how can both of those things be
Where's
true?
It going? Yeah.
And where it's going is on other things which aren't directly classroom provision and so on. So it's going on things like homeschool transport, which is an enormous cost pressure in local areas. Also on things like administrative costs to actually manage the various caseloads of people applying for education, health and care plans, and then turning those round within the kind of statutory timelines.
Interestingly, I think it was it last week? I think Kendra, who was the guest last week, was saying that she spoke to, oh no, it was somebody else actually, was saying that they'd worked out with the number of ECHPs they've got that actually it's taking their SENCO 4 days just to complete, and this is just an ordinary primary school in Tameside, I remembered it now, but just taking 4 days to complete those reviews, so, and that's just the physical meeting of those reviews, this is, and a little bit of the follow-up. So, you can see how that escalates out, then some of the actions that follow from that, leading into you've got to contact somebody, whatever it is. It's an enormous task. I mean, I suppose that's the sort of element that your book is trying to support, isn't it, or to try and address?
Well, yeah, because it tells us something about what SENCOs are doing. One of the things I always say, right, your SENCO is a highly qualified member of staff in the school. That that they ought to be on the school leadership team, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's said so in the code of practice as well.
I think they have to be, don't they? Or at least
well, I think it says they should.
Nominally.
It's a should rather than a must, but certainly that there's a push in that direction. They've got to be a qualified teacher. They've got to have the SENCO qualification and so on. So these are highly skilled people, and to think that they're spending most of their time on paperwork, that's a very expensive administrator, isn't it?
Yes.
If I had a SENCO in my school, I'd want them in the classroom supporting increasing that ordinarily available provision, looking at really high quality inclusive teaching and learning. That's really what you want your SENCOs to be spending their time on.
Yeah, it's the same argument that we used to have years ago about head teachers doing basic admin. And the argument would go, well, a lot of the tasks you're doing should be done by an administrator. And they'd said, yeah, but I haven't got an administrator and I haven't got the funds to buy in an administrator. So what you're saying basically is, to be more efficient, we need to spend some more money. And in a tight budget, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've seen that works really well in some schools is because not all of when I'm talking about admin tasks here, and it makes it sound like they're all simple things, and some of them are quite specialist admin tasks. So some of them do require the SENCO's time and effort, but not all of them. Because there are some things where you're chasing external agencies to send you reports, or trying to follow up on various actions and things like that. So some of that is lower level kind of admin. Or more routine admin. And one of the things I've seen some schools do is say, well, look, I can't afford a full-time administrator, but what I could do is allocate a day a week of admin time to free up my SENCO for a day a week, to spend a day a week in a classroom. So that's 40 days a year straight away that your SENCO's going to be in a classroom that they wouldn't have been before. And that's quite cost effective, because 1 day a week of a low-level administrator is obviously a very different order of magnitude in terms of cost.
I think one of the things that we do to get around that, and obviously bear in mind that the varying needs of parents as well, is we use our family support liaison officer who'll do a lot of the legwork of those phone calls and checking if parents can get there. Do they need help? Do they need help with the bus schedule and chasing all that? And then also doing that prep work before the meeting, because sometimes that can take a little bit more time as well. So then your meeting can be a little bit more efficient. And I know that for us, obviously getting that engagement for parents who, as you touched on with transport, often have to get free buses to get to the school.
Well,
knowing that they're going to have that help when they're there can be helpful. It can take a barrier away.
Yeah. It's interesting because when we had a guest on, the guy who runs the Teacher Toolkit website was a guest on here a few weeks ago, and when we were doing it, another guest appeared. I thought, oh, we've got somebody's coming in. He's invited somebody. I don't know who it is, but actually, what it was he for his meetings he automatically uses a transcript. Yeah. So he shared the transcript with us, and I now have registered for this Firefly system transcript, where I'd never seen it before. But actually, my son-in-law is a senior leader in a highly successful school in Stockport, primary school, and I just shared that with him. He said, "Well, can we use that for our SEN reviews? Is it possible, if we got permission from the parents, to just record it in that way and minute it in that way?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but you could go and see." But actually, the use of technology is, we think, oh, well, AI, ChatGPT, all this, but actually, the teachers I'm meeting, they're not using that. Well, the vast majority of teachers that I'm meeting, it might not be the world, but actually, the majority of them are not using the sort of the opportunities of technology to improve their work.
I think that may be largely true. I think some of that might be ideologically driven as well, because there is some rhetoric out there about, oh, we won't need teachers anymore because the AI is going to come and do it. I'm not sure that's actually true, but there is that kind of thing. But some schools are using AI, and we talk about it in the book. Is it worth me sharing with you some of how schools are using AI?
Yeah,
Because they're doing some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and then I'll tell you what, we'll cut you off in about 5 minutes so we get round to what's caught our eye this week.
Yeah, no, well, a couple of things. So one of the things we talk about in the book is a school where they actually are using AI to do formative assessments and give feedback to children. And they actually did a study because they weren't sure whether this was going to be as good as teachers giving formative assessments. And they did a kind of anonymized study where they got the teachers to mark a whole load of work and the AI to mark a whole load of work, and didn't say which was which. And then everyone sat around the table and had to decide which was the better feedback. And actually, it was the AI that was considered the better feedback. So what they've done in this school is they've said, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll use the AI to give the feedback, and then the teachers will work with the students on how to implement the feedback and how much more effective is that. So that's happening already in some schools. Some schools have trained their teaching assistants in prompt engineering. So if you don't know what that is, that's the thing you type into something like ChatGPT. They've trained it so that they can, for example, change the reading age of set texts on the fly in lessons, so they can use that. And I've seen that kind of in action. So that's something I've seen. I've seen some schools where they're using sentiment analysis to predict potential issues or changes in mood in people before they are spotted by the humans in the room. So there's all kinds of really interesting stuff going on. So I think it's quite excellent, quite an experimental stage. But lots
I'm
happening.
the governor have just had a governor's meeting Wednesday night, and they've bought into a package that a teacher's developed, an AI package. I don't know the name of the teacher, so I'm not going. It's a company, but they were saying in terms of curriculum stuff, wanting to do, let's say, some comprehension on the Victorians, which is their subject, literally 5 sentences into this system, and they've got a printout with a comprehension, as many questions as they want, a type of question they want, and the ability for it to be marked when the child's completed it, and it's instantaneous. It's just the time taken to say what I want rather than write it all out yourself. So they're quite excited about it in terms of curriculum delivery.
As long as we know that it's replacing tasks, not roles.
My sharing role is here now. Well, actually, it was a fascinating chat, wasn't it? I mean, what we'll do is we'll put a link to. Has the book been published yet, Maxine?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll put a link at the end of this chat. I'll put an image of it there, and try and make sure people sort of get sight of it. So, quickly, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Very quickly, I'm not sure if it was a throwaway line or an answer to a question, but the Secretary of State for Education has made it known that she's not against, I think the phrase was, or open to schools returning to local authority control, which is of great interest to me personally, but I honestly don't think it's thought through, because I don't think there's a means in which it can happen, unless it's an individual academy and the governors of the academy have decided they want to go back to the local authority. I can't see any other way.
One way, though, of making it happen, though, isn't it? To simply, I mean, the controlling mechanism over trusts is actually the funding formula, the funding agreement. So if you pull the funding agreement, you just say we're not, which is what they do when they want to transfer a trust to another trust. They just simply close down the funding agreement, which means we can't do anything.
Yeah,
so
but
we have to do something else.
That's the DFE's then choice of moving a school back into local authority. The suggestion was that schools themselves, or academy trusts themselves, could request. But what I'm saying is the people in charge of those schools are not the same people who were in charge necessarily when it became an academy, or when it was a local authority run school. And their interest in saying, well, we're not happy with where we've gone, let's go back, is very different, because they're in a different organisation altogether. I just think there'll be a lot of legal things to get right before that could happen.
It's interesting though that the government said we're not going to fiddle around with the structures of schools. That was one of their statements before the election. But I heard that what you were saying, Stan. But also there was news recently about are they going to go ahead with the three sixth forms run by Eton and Star, one of which is in Middlesbrough. Just an aside, they don't need the additional provision in Middlesbrough post 16. But actually, there was something about, well, it's going to be good for you to have this sort of high standards, whatever. So it looks like they're looking at putting the plug on that. The free school program looks as though it's being significantly reviewed again. So this idea that it does feel as though there is some fiddling around or some intention to try and get more heavily involved in this, which actually I probably welcome, to be honest.
I
Anyway.
think something needs to be done to put back together the what's fractured education system in the last 15 years, and how you put it back together is difficult. I mean, I go back to Cummings saying one of his things was to smash the existing system, but I don't think he ever had a plan to put it back together again. I think that's part of the way he and Michael Gove at the time were thinking.
Well,
Break it up and let the market build it back up.
it worked on the Brexit vote. I'm sure it could work other times or something. Anyway, let's.
I was just going to say the problem is we have two education systems at the moment, running in parallel. I almost don't care which one we have. We just need to have one.
Yes.
And a national curriculum that only applies to a certain.
Yeah, but also some oversight as to how those systems are working locally. I mean, I continue to hear of individual schools or trusts that are simply not engaging properly with their local community. And there's nobody at the moment holding those trusts to account for their selfishness and their sort of inward looking approach to, whether it's admissions, whether it's about inclusion, whether it's about telling parents that actually this school is not right for you, you're probably best served down the road.
There's nothing more frustrating, right? When you're in the local authority, which when I was in Yorkshire, that the responsibility for children still lies with the local authority, but you then talk to some academy chains who don't want to know, just say.
There is a fundamental problem if you have a nationwide trust with a curriculum which is so hardwired that it can't flex to the needs of Liverpool. Just picking Liverpool, could be Manchester, could be Oldham. There's something wrong with that system, This is getting me on. See, Adam, you chatted before about
you've lost your right to.
I'm now chatting about my issue. It's sort of like it's all planned. Maxine, what's caught your eye this week? Let's get back to reality. Let's get back to real life stuff, shall we?
Yeah, so obviously we're a really small special school, so we've actually got 30 staff in total, and this week we've had 9 staff absent. So with a very different thing, we have a bit of a stomach bug going around and obviously some more long-term sickness, but that's really meant this week we've had no staff in our kitchen at all. So which has meant all hands on deck. And I think sometimes when people think about picking stuff up as a head teacher in the school, so it's been myself and the business manager who's picked this up, that actually it's not just the serving of the food or even the making the food. We're actually having to do the orders and the unloading the deliveries and all of that prep and things that definitely I never trained to do. And thankfully my business manager has a background in hospitality, so that's really worked out this week. But as I said earlier, it's been an interesting week of doing things that are absolutely not my role.
Yeah,
and we're really fortunate because our staff team just, will all help out.
It's sort of interesting. Probably the question for us, Stan, what is the most non-likely head teacher duty that you had to undertake in your career? I can think of mine straight away.
My first day as a head teacher, I was involved with removing a dead squirrel off the road outside and burying it in a service with some children.
Mine was during a storm. The part of the roof fell off. So my duty was to try and protect the the wind from actually stopping the wind from blowing sort of parts of the roof onto another part of the school. And actually, you know, it's one of those situations you think, you know, you go off to these courses, don't you, and say it's all about leadership. It's, you know, it's about this, you know, got to be dynamic. And you think, here I am trying to sort of like trying to stop the tide from coming in. You know what I mean? There's nothing I could do to stop this wind, you know. But yeah, also the tactical support team being on the roof was an interest. It's just reminding me of the roof. Tactical support team on the roof with a sniper because there was somebody raiding with a gun the local pub about 100 yards away from the school. I'll never forget that day. The kids thought it was absolutely amazing. You know, I mean, what a story to tell. Adam, you did talk about the National Audit Office report, didn't you? Any more you want to talk about on that?
Well, I didn't talk about that. I mean, the other thing that kind of caught my eye, which is, I suppose it was the budget week rather than this week, but I think it's still being talked about, was that Rachel Reeves actually mentioned send spend in the budget. So education didn't get a lot of that time particularly, but the bit of education that was talked about, interestingly, was the send part of it, which the fact that we've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer that's really getting interested in this shows you just how high stakes the money and the cost element of this is now. You know, this is a really difficult situation where you've got, you know, significant numbers of local authorities in debt because of high needs funding and so on, with no real tangible plan to get that back. I mean, there's been all kinds of different systems about, you know, and you know, consultants coming into authorities to try and turn things around. But I come back to the fact that there is a systemic challenge here and the funding model is fundamentally flawed. So I hope that the fact that it's been talked about at that level means we might see some action on that now.
See, that's an optimistic end, isn't it? How you? I'm feeling sort of. I'm not with the new government. I sometimes. Definitely feel more positive. Don't get me wrong, but also it's not. It's not felt as though it's all clearly laid out. You know, I feel as though there are some gaps that have emerged where perhaps, you know, it's taken more time or perhaps there hasn't been sufficient thinking about it. You know, for me, that the school improvement program, the way they're going to intervene, you know,
Oh, get me on that.
that feels like a disaster. That feels like nothing really. It's, you know,
It, to me, having read it today, this morning, it looks like the nationalisation of school improvement.
yeah, but also the recreation of of new gradings for schools, you know, with no real criteria. You know, I mean, just, you know, we're going to lump the RIs and the special measure schools in the bottom category, and then the good are in the middle, and the really good are at the top. You know, I mean, it does feel a little bit as if it's through the back door again.
And we're going to buy school improvement from goodness knows where, and no accountability. There's nowhere does it say, you know, the school improvement team that go in have some kind of responsibility for making sure it improves.
Yeah, yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what this means for the role of the regulator as well, because they've always argued that they're, you know, people have different views on whether this is true or not, but they've always argued that they are a force for good in terms of school improvement.
Mm.
Yeah, and there's probably, yeah. What we need, though, of the regulator is a truly independent review of its effectiveness. Yeah.
Who regulates the regulators, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there lies another edition of the Frankenstein chat. Can I thank Maxine and Adam for joining us this
Thanks,
morning?
both of you.
It's been really interesting. And the lovely thing, I don't know about you, Stan, but we had no control really over the chat. You know, we had no, it's not scripted. It's not, the only little bit is a bit of pre-planning in terms of the areas we're going to cover, but some really interesting stuff we went down today. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're back next week for another edition. So until then, we'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye bye.